Now, in my previous videos, I've mentioned that there were three tithes: the Levite tithe, Numbers 18, 20 and 21, the festival tithe, Deuteronomy 14, 22 to 27, and the poor tithe, Deuteronomy 14, 28 and 29. If you qualified for a tithe, then you didn't pay one tithe, you paid three tithes. However, you paid these during a 7-year cycle, and on the 7-year cycle, on the 7th year, no tithes were paid. Also on the 50th year, the year of Jubilee, no tithes were paid. There was also a series of offerings, and you paid as many as, it's hard to determine, 10 to 13 offerings. One of these offerings was another tithe. It was an offering which was a tithe. It was called the Temorah Mazah. Temorah means offering in Hebrew, and Mazah means tithe. So it was an offering that happened to be a tithe. It's mentioned at Numbers 18:26. It's sometimes referred to or called the tithe of the tithe. What happened was that you always you paid your tithes to the Levites. You didn't pay tithes to the priest. The tithes went to the Levites. And what you paid to the priest was an offering. However, the Levites received a 10% tithe, and they had to give a tenth of that to the priest, the Temorah Mazah, or Mazah. Now, some people have suggested that there was a fifth tithe at Amos chapter 4, verse 4, which I shall read. Come to Bethel and transgress, at Gilgal multiply transgression. Bring your sacrifices every morning, your tithes every 3 days. So it says, bring your tithes every 3 days. Now, was there a fifth tithe which you paid every 3 days? Notice that the people who make this claim, they will take this passage rather literally. They'll say, well, the text says you bring your tithes every 3 days. They don't look at the context. Come to Bethel and transgress. Transgress means to sin. At Gilgal, multiply transgressions. Okay, so the context is God using irony here. God is mocking people who are sinning by going to Bethel. Bethel was a center of religious worship in the northern kingdom. It was 12 miles north of Jerusalem, and Jeroboam, the wicked king, had set up a golden calf here at 1 Kings 12:25 to 33, which was still here many, many years later at Hosea 13:2. So the context is idolatry. And sometimes God uses what's called hyperbole. That's a literary form of exaggeration to make a point. So bring your sacrifices every morning, bring your tithes every 3 days. This is God using exaggeration to make a point that these were people who were sinning, and they were zealous. They were very keen to and zealous in their sin. So no, they weren't paying tithes every 3 days. But God uses that figure of speech to emphasize the zeal that they had for their false idolatrous worship. Now what I'm going to do is read from Amos chapter 3, verse 13, to Amos chapter 4, verse 5. Notice a few things before I start. Hear this word, you cows of Bashan, which is chapter 4, verse 1. These are the people who God is addressing. Some people think this is a reference to the rich, pampered Samaritan women. Other people think it just refers to all the people in Samaria. This is the northern part of the kingdom who were sinning. So some scholars say it just refers to rich, pampered women. Some people say cows would be a figurative representation of all the people. God is not speaking to animals. He's not speaking to cows here, okay, to cattle. Obviously, cows of Bashan is a figure of speech. Everyone agrees on that. Well, hold on. If cows of Bashan is a figure of speech, then paying your tithes every 3 days must also be another figure of speech. You see, you cannot pay your tithes every 3 days literally, but then when you read cows of Bashan, you say, oh, that's not to be taken literal, that's figurative. If cows of Bashan is figurative, then paying your sacrifices every morning and your tithes every 3 days is also figurative. So if one is figurative, the other is figurative. If one is literal and paying your tithes every 3 days is to be taken literally, then the people who were paying these tithes were cattle, cows of Bashan, moo cows, moo, moo, okay? You can't take one literally and one spiritually. They're either both literal or they're both spiritual. So I'm going to read from Amos 3:13. Notice the context being transgression, sin, wickedness, and notice how God is speaking with irony and with a mocking tone as he addresses this sin. Hear and testify against the house of Jacob, says the Lord God, the God of hosts, that in the day I punish Israel for their transgressions, I will also visit destruction on the altars of Bethel, and the horns of the altar shall be cut off and fall to the ground. I will destroy the winter house along with the summer house. The houses of ivory shall perish. The great houses shall have an end, says the Lord. This is referring to the Assyrian invasion, when they invaded the land. And what they did was they actually put hooks, real hooks, in people's mouths, and they sewed people together using hooks in their mouths, so that people were roped together with hooks in their mouths, and then they were led away by the Assyrians. Chapter 4, verse 1. Hear this word, you cows of Bashan, who are on the mountain of Samaria, who oppress the poor, who crush the needy, who say to your husbands, bring us wine, bring us drink. The Lord God has sworn by his holiness. Behold, the day shall come upon you when he shall take you away with fishhooks, and your posterity with fishhooks. For you will go out through broken walls. That refers to an invasion in which the city walls have been breached. The city has been captured by enemies. Okay? Every one straight ahead of her, and you will be cast into Harmon, says the Lord. Come to Bethel and transgress. Come to Gilgal, multiply transgression. Bring your sacrifices every morning, your tithes every 3 days. Offer a sacrifice of thanksgiving with leaven. Proclaim and announce the free will offerings. For this you love, you children of Israel, says the Lord God. So again, to recap, Bethel was the center of idolatrous religious worship. It had had a golden calf for many years. God is speaking to pampered people. He's either speaking to specifically the Sumerian women, the women of Samaria, or he's speaking to all the people and using cows and as a figure of speech for all of the people. He's talking about them being led captive with fish hooks through their mouth. Notice in verse 1 he says that these people are wicked. They oppress the poor. They crush the needy. You see, they should be looking after the poor, looking after the needy. That's what the poor tithe was. Every 3 years, in Deuteronomy 14, 28 and 29, you gave a tithe to help the poor. Well, these rich, pampered people didn't care about the poor. That's possibly why God uses irony. Come to Bethel and transgress. At Gilgal, multiply your transgressions. God is mocking them. He's using irony when he says, bring your sacrifices every morning, your tithes every 3 days. Were these people paying the poor tithe every 3 years? Well, the text doesn't say, but it's almost certain that they weren't. They were too busy looking after themselves. So God uses exaggeration, hyperbole, to mock them. It then says in verse 5, Amos 4 verse 5, offer a sacrifice of thanksgiving with leaven. Well, of course it should have been with unleavened bread, not with leaven. So I hope you can see that there was no fifth tithe. Amos 4:4 is not referring to a fifth tithe. Bring your sacrifices every morning, you people who transgress, you people who oppress the poor, you people who crush the needy. God is using irony here. He's mocking these people. They should be offering poor tithes every 3 years to look after the poor. They really didn't care. They didn't care at all. And so God uses hyperbole, exaggeration, when he says your tithes every 3 days. The word for 3 days is yamin. Yom is the Hebrew word for day. So we have the plural word here, yamin, which simply means 3 days. And God is obviously mocking them. He's using irony to say, you're wicked people, you're under my judgment. I'm going to use the Assyrians to take you out of the land. Your city walls will be broken down. You'll be led into captivity with fish hooks through your mouth. Thank you.